They created what many consider the greatest love stories of all time. But what was the inspiration behind their classic works? Author Siri James blends history with fiction to explore the romances of Jane Austen and Charlotte Bronte. Coming up next. A Jane Austen resurgence has swept the world as fans yearn for the romance of a bygone era. One such fan decided to follow her passion and write a novel about Austen. After a successful screenwriting career in Hollywood, Siri James created her first work of historical fiction, The Lost Memoirs of Jane Austen. It received critical acclaim and became a bestseller. Her new novel, The Secret Diaries of Charlotte Bronte, imagines the driving forces behind another beloved author, the creator of Jane Eyre. Siri, welcome. It's nice to have you in our studios today.
Thank you.
So you started as a screenwriter and you wrote a lot of scripts for TV and film. How did you break into that industry?
I broke into that industry because I just loved movies so much. I decided I wanted to try writing a movie. And I taught myself how to write a script by studying screenplay format and watching movies on TV and comparing one to the other. And then I was very lucky. I had a cousin who said, I know somebody in the industry. I'll give him your script. And I figured nothing would come of that. But something wonderful came of it. He turned out to have connections and hired me to write for his show, and that started a screenwriting career that lasted many years and the sale of many screenplays. I had a wonderful time.
Any particular genre that you wrote?
I wrote everything. I wrote romantic comedy, I wrote romantic drama, I wrote thrillers, mysteries. I even wrote an animated movie about whales going on migration with whales falling in love. It was fantastic.
So any particular favorite when you were in that business?
One of my favorites was a Danielle Steele book that I adapted called Once in a Lifetime. And it aired on NBC, and it now airs every year on the Lifetime network.
You majored in English in college, and you said you read Jane Austen, but you didn't become a rabid fan until later, and again, from one of your favorite sources, the movies, yes?
Yes. Well, I loved Pride and Prejudice and Emma when I read them in college. And really, Jane Austen didn't surface on my radar in a huge way until about 1995 when Sense and Sensibility came out, Emma Thompson and Ang Lee's wonderful movie, and at the same time there was that amazing miniseries with Colin Firth and Jennifer Eel in Pride and Prejudice, and I just watched them over and over. I wanted to be in a Jane Austen movie. I was so swept away, and I thought somehow I have to write about her.
So it's 200 years later since the Regency period during which Jane Austen lived. Why do you think people find it so fascinating now?
Well, if you're just talking about the era, I think people love the idea that it's so romantic, and we have romanticized it, but the beautiful dresses that the ladies wore, the men in their breeches and waistcoats, and everyone acting so chivalrous. But, you know, there's a lot more to why we love Jane Austen than the fact that she wrote during the Regency era. It's the brilliance of her writing that draws us to her over and over again. The characters that she created who are so real and recognizable, we still see them today. And the topics that she wrote about people dealing with personal problems that we can recognize, money or the lack of it, society's problems, dealing with family, and the problems of falling in love, wanting to find that perfect person to spend your life with, and what we risk to find that person and give our heart to them. That is a timeless subject, and we keep going back to her stories because we see ourselves in her heroines and we want to be them.
And you say we have romanticized the period because that period was in fact a time where women married because they needed it for social and economic standing as much as for love, yes?
Yes. It was difficult for women for many reasons, and that's just one of them.
Who are your favorite characters with Jane Austen?
Well, Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy, of course, but I really love all of her characters. Even the bad characters are fascinating, and it's so much fun to read about them. The funny characters, the mother, Mrs. Bennet, she's you know, hysterical and annoying, and it's just so much fun to read about them. Everybody knows somebody like Mrs. Bennet.
Well, I love even how the books are packaged. They're very romantic.
They did a good job. Aren't they
But
beautiful?
what was the genesis of the idea behind the Lost Memoirs of Jane Austen?
I saw the movies when they came out. You know, I loved the movies so much, and I thought, what happened to Jane Austen herself? So I read some of her biographies, and it didn't seem that she had a real romance, at least none that we knew about. Then the movie Shakespeare in Love came out. This is about Shakespeare falling in love and being inspired to write Romeo and Juliet. I was so excited about that. I said, oh, someone should give Jane Austen a romance that inspires her to write her book. So when I studied her life, I realized she was away from writing for about 8 or 9 years after her family moved to Bath. What if something or someone re-inspired her to go back to her writing? So I interwove a story with all the facts of her life and an imagined man that I thought she would fall in love with. And I wrote the story that I wanted to read. I wanted to give her a wonderful love story that inspired her and a really good reason why she never told the world about it.
So describe the man, without giving away the book, of course. Describe the man that she falls in love with in your imagination.
Well, of course, he's tall and handsome, but more importantly, very well read. They fall in love over conversation, which I believe is the key to all romance. They share the same values, and he's got a wonderful sense of humor, and he is thrilled when he finds out that she is a great storyteller, and he is very encouraging to her to follow her passion and not let anything stand in her way. That's the kind of man Jane would fall in love with.
Okay, so that is your fiction, but now back to reality. We don't know that she ever did have a romance, so do you imagine her as perhaps a woman of today sitting at home alone reading a romance novel, but instead of reading it, she was writing it? Or do you think that she was so unimpressed with the idea that a woman had to marry for economic and social standing that she just chose to avoid all of it, or none of the above?
Oh, I don't know that that was the reason. I think I understand Jane because I am a writer, and I can't not write. It's as necessary to me as breathing, and to me that was why Jane wrote. She was taught at home for the most part by her father. She was very well read, and when you're possessed by this need to pick up your pen and tell a story, there is nothing that can stop you.
So maybe just no time for love. Because back then you had to write it all out longhand by pen, of course.
No, I think she had time for love, and if she had met the right man, then she would have married him. And I think she did meet the right man, but she had to keep it a secret. And that's what this story is about.
Okay. Well, when you're researching a book, you often go on location, so you went to England to research this book. What'd you find there? What'd you learn? Were you surprised by anything?
Oh, it was so much fun. I created my own Jane Austen tour by studying all the important places where she lived and visited. And it was a great thrill to walk through her home at Chawton Cottage, where she lived and wrote or rewrote all of her famous books, and to see the desk that she wrote at. It really helped me to imagine and put myself into her head to see where she lived. I especially loved going down to Lyme, because that was one of her favorite places. She wrote about it in Persuasion with great love. Most of the locations in Jane Austen's books are referred to only in passing, but in Persuasion, she spent quite a bit of time describing Lyme Regis and the Cobb and walking on the Cobb and the beautiful coastline, and so I had to see it for myself. I had to walk on that Cobb, and it was even more beautiful than I thought, and more windy than I thought, so I put that in the book.
Did you actually sit at her desk?
They don't let you sit at the back. There's plexiglass in front of it.
But I bet it still had to be a goosebumpy moment.
It was exciting.